So my name's Remy Long. I am the Ann Arbor Greenbelt Program Manager. However, while I look like a city employee, I talk like a city employee, I wear one of their ID badges, I am in fact not a city employee. I work for a national nonprofit called the Conservation Fund, which is contracted by the city of Ann Arbor to administer the Greenbelt program on their behalf. So I just help facilitate the vision that you all have. So today, I'm going to be giving a presentation about the first 15 years of the Greenbelt program. And I'm actually relatively new to the city, to the Greenbelt, and I joined in late 2018, and what really drew me to this program was at a national scale how unique an opportunity exists with this program and how much of a precedent it's setting for success and regional land conservation efforts and collaboration across the nation. So I was extremely drawn to this program and impressed by it prior to joining, and I'm even more impressed now that I'm actually here and I see all that's actually being done up close. So the millage that funds this passed in 2003, and I'll get into this a bit in the presentation, but that ordinance, the millage funds two things. It funds both park acquisitions within the city limits and then regional land preservation efforts within the Greenbelt district surrounding the city of Ann Arbor. There's a map of it on the wall. As we've entered the 15th year, or exiting the 15th year of the program with a 30-year millage, we thought the Greenbelt Advisory Commission, who is charged with making recommendations on the program to City Council, thought it was prudent and relevant to look at the past 15 years of what we've done and ask ourselves what's gone right and what do we like about this, and then look forward to the next 15 years and ask ourselves what strategically do we want to change or keep the same. So this presentation will help us get up to the point where we're all on the same page about the first 15 years of what the program's achieved. But in addition to that, conversations will be facilitated by Anika.
I'm supposed to be near a mic.
Yes, you are.
So my name is Anika Matteo, and I work with a small consulting firm based here in Ann Arbor, Michigan, called Bridgeport Consulting. I know half of you already. Bridgeport does strategic planning and public engagement work and change leadership, primarily for nonprofits, higher education, public institutions like libraries, and local governments. We're brought in to help facilitate the strategic planning process with the GAC, and that included in that are these public meetings, and this is the third full public meeting that has been run. All of them have been run in the same fashion, and we have one more scheduled for next week, and then that will wrap up this portion of the work, and then the work shifts back to the GAC to sort of refine and propose the plan for moving forward, and then we will draft that plan that will then go on for City Council's comments, et cetera. So let's see, desired outcomes for tonight. If you look at your agenda, 1, 2, 3 at the top, building a shared understanding of the successes and challenges of the first 15 years of the Greenbelt, as Remy just mentioned. Elicit your values and vision for the future of the Greenbelt, and gather some input on helping to inform the strategic directions and priorities for the future. So if you look at the agenda in just a moment, Remy will give you his presentation about the first 15 years, and then we'll have time to talk about your questions and what you would envision success looking like. So if we were looking back, say, 15 years from now, then what would a really successful Greenbelt program look like? And then we'll discuss priorities for investment. So the most challenging part of strategic planning is always deciding what is a priority over something else, right? If we could just keep everything, then strategic planning would be really easy. What else did I want to say? Before we start a conversation like this, I like to suggest some potential ground rules and see if these are okay with the group. The first one is inviting you to be fully present, and place your devices on silent, be here now with the group. Of course, if you need to take a call, please feel free to step out and do what you need to do. Respect and welcome differences, and in that we would welcome you to be very candid in your opinions, questions, and thoughts about the Greenbelt. There are no right or wrong answers. Should we take a break to do a little dance together? And I normally remind folks to help make sure that we include as many voices as possible. I don't think that's going to be a challenge tonight because we have a more intimate group, so we'll all have plenty of time to talk. If you're not familiar with this facility, bathrooms are right around the corner this direction. Food is in the back. Please help yourself whenever you would like to have some. And then let's start with a round of introductions so we know who's in the room. What drew you here tonight? So if you could tell us your name and what drew you here. And for the GAC members, the members of the Greenbelt Advisory Commission, who are sitting here, I just wanted to identify those folks in the room. You want to start?
Sure. I'm John Ramsberg, serve on the Greenbelt. John Ramsberg, I serve on the Greenbelt Advisory Commission as an at-large member. Oh, why was I drawn here? Because I serve on the Greenbelt Advisory Commission and care passionately about land conservation in Ann Arbor.
And I'm Roseanne Bloomer. I'm also on the Greenbelt Advisory. I'm a new member, and I'm the farmer member of the group. My husband and I have a farm in Webster Township.
I'm Robert Gordon. I'm on the Greenbelt because the creation of the Greenbelt required folks who worked with local nonprofits, and I was the lobbyist for the Sierra Club at the time. The whole idea of the Greenbelt is exactly what land preservation should be, so it's very easy for me to support this.
Hi, I'm Sarah Mills. I am here because my research is all on farmland preservation. When I got my PhD, I was trying to understand how we can refresh the farmland preservation toolbox. And so Greenbelts have been in that, but my work has really been on energy, and so renewable energy and what role they can play in helping to preserve farmland. And so I thought, as you're refreshing the plan, it makes sense to kind of see how that landscape has changed. And so I'm happy to talk a little bit about that. But also, I sit on the City Planning Commission, and I know how important it is when we're refreshing plans to get public input so that you all can kind of move forward. I do not represent the Planning Commission here. I just note that that's kind of something that I do on a every week basis. Normally, that's where I am Tuesdays.
Hi, my name is Rich Chang. I am mainly here just as a resident of Pistol Township area, but I do serve on a lot of different nonprofit boards. For instance, I'm like the chair of the Ann Arbor Ipsy Chamber, and farmers, I think, also don't get a fair shake or attention, right? Because a lot of people just think, oh, businesses, you're going to have a brick and mortar store or some kind of other companies, especially like tech. So I actually have a software development company here in town too, right? But I've always been interested in farmland. One, where I grew up in New York, we were surrounded by farms. And then where I live now in Pistol Township, we actually have farmland right on the border of where we live and everything. So I just was interested in this. Some friends are actually how I found out about these forums. And I said, okay, I'm going to come here and see what happens.
And thank you for your service. Thank you too, Rich, but I encountered you at the Planning Commission, and you were always asking really good questions and very thoughtful and engaged in the process. Great to have you.
All right, so welcome everyone. I think the best way to get started is if we all have a common base of information. So we'll turn it over to Remy to tell us about the first 15 years.
I'm just going to give another shout out to Sarah that back when I was a wet behind the ears, brand new, fresh grad student at U of M, I had this obsessive interest with farmland preservation, and no one would listen to me except for Sarah. And here I am. So thank you for not calling me crazy. All right, so The Open Space and Parkland Preservation Millage is colloquially known as the Greenbelt Millage, and it started with a grand vision that was overwhelmingly supported by the Ann Arbor voters who were willing to approve a 0.5 30-year tax levy to make the vision a reality. The millage funds both new parkland acquisitions within the city and regional land preservation efforts. 1/3 of the millage revenue is dedicated toward new park acquisitions, while 2/3 goes to the Greenbelt program. And we're here tonight to just talk about that 2/3 of the millage funding within the Greenbelt district. So while the millage, at the time the millage passed, for everyone in the city, new parkland was relatively easy to imagine compared to regional land preservation efforts. Folks knew parks, had relationships with them, could imagine adding new parks to the system or adding on to existing parks. But at the time the millage passed, very few cities had similar programs to the Greenbelt established. So in that sense, the Greenbelt is truly a pioneering program. The vision that was being pioneered was one of a city surrounded by farmland that characterizes our rural heritage and sources the local food economy. It was a vision of safeguarding the city's drinking water, and a vision of open space, recreational opportunities, and diverse habitats surrounding the city of Ann Arbor. So land conservation takes two primary forms. One is purchasing the land outright, and we see that across Washtenaw County and beyond in the state, where an entity such as the county could own a public nature preserve, the state could own DNR land that's open to the public for recreation, there are national forests, and so on. But the other method for land conservation is protecting private properties, and how that's done is through acquiring the development rights to the property, which then restricts any potential harm to the conservation values of the property. So while the Greenbelt funds can contribute toward acquisition of land that is then open to the public, it has been practiced that another entity such as the county or a township hold that property if it's going to be owned and managed as a public nature preserve. So with that, the bulk of the Greenbelt's work to date has been accomplished through purchasing development rights. And this is a cost-effective approach that keeps land in private ownership on the tax rolls and preserved in perpetuity. When we own private property, we own a bundle of rights associated with that property. So think of it as a bundle of sticks. You have the right to enjoy the property, the right to sell it. You also own the development rights associated with that property. But by selling the development rights, a landowner is voluntarily relinquishing their ability to develop the property while still maintaining some of the fundamental rights to the property to use it, enjoy it, farm, recreate, or sell the property in the future or leave it to their heirs. But in selling the development rights, they've permanently removed the option that that property be developed forever. So to date, the Greenbelt has helped protect 5,718 acres of land in the Greenbelt district. The cumulative market value of those properties is over $64 million. However, by using purchase of development rights and by leveraging matching funds, the city taxpayers have only had to pay just over $23 million to see that entire $64 million worth of real estate protected in perpetuity. So through strategic partnerships and leveraging funds, we've been responsible fiscal stewards of the Greenbelt Millage funds. Breaking down that chart further, as I said, the total land value is represented in the light yellow circle, while the protection value, either the development rights or the cost of purchasing the property outright to protect it, is the Pac-Man dark yellow figure over the yellow circle. Breaking those funds down, the cost of protecting the land, here is the relative share among the partners. So the Greenbelt's contributed 36.1% to the protection, while the townships, county, federal government, and the landowners themselves through donation have contributed other percentages. So what does that actually look like? Those are the numbers, but what does it look like on the landscape? This is a map of the Greenbelt district in the year 2000. And this is now. And I'll do that transition one more time. and you can ooh and ah as needed. So this is a map at circa 2000, and this is what's been preserved in the Greenbelt District now. So around the same time the Greenbelt began, I do not mean to say that we're the only ones working on this effort or regional land conservation, and quite the contrary. Over the first 15 years of the Greenbelt Millage, we've seen 3 townships pass conservation millages, those townships being Webster, Scioto, and Ann Arbor townships. Washtenaw County renewed their own conservation millage, and there are 2 active nonprofit land conservancies operating in the region. When you look nationally at the density of conservation programs happening in this area, it's truly unprecedented. You can go to the next best example, which might be Boulder, and you've got the city and the county working together. But beyond that, nothing at the scale of the township's investment that's taken place, and nothing at the pace that the land conservancies are operating in. So overall, it's a unique and noteworthy story that should be given more national credit. So I also want to highlight that because of all those players, we have not been involved in all of these preservation efforts, but here is a map and it illustrates how integral the Greenbelt has been to the success of forming that landscape over the last 15 years. So our properties are highlighted in orange. The impact of our work can be broken down into 3 main categories: farms and farmland, protecting waters, and open space and biodiversity. To start, let's talk about farms and farmland. The face of our landscape has changed considerably over time. First, swamps and wetlands were drained and tiled to make arable land rich to farm with prime ag soils. And in far less time, Washtenaw County has lost much of its prime farmland that can sustain the ag economy or local food system. And for what land remains in our area, there are social stressors exacerbating the issues of keeping farms in farming hands. A farm is at the highest risk of being lost when it changes ownership from the older generation to the new, and there's a looming intergenerational farmland transfer crisis at our doorstep, and we'll be seeing more and more of it play out in the coming years. But what has the Greenbelt done to help? Well, we've protected the farms themselves, the most fundamental piece of the equation, the land itself. And in practice, by removing the development rights from a property, we're helping lower the cost of that property and make it more accessible to a new generation of farmers who, surveys have shown that the #1 barrier to access for new and beginning farmers is affordable access to land. So while we're not outpacing the rates of farmland loss by any stretch of the imagination, we're very proud of the impact that we've managed to have, and we've contributed to a large percentage of the county's total conservation success story. We've protected 50 working farms, and while not all of those farms source food directly to our local markets, the Greenbelt program likes to take a longer vision of what this work actually means. So we protect the most fundamental resource, the farm itself, and we allow the markets to change and shift, and those lands and what's being grown on them will inevitably shift as well. But we'll make the resource of a land base near to a city center available through our work. So putting that into a different perspective, 50 working farms may not sound like a lot. I understand that. There are over 87,000 acres of total land within the Greenbelt District. And the Greenbelt has only protected 6.2% of that total land area. However, when you go into a more granular analysis, this is the farmland that remains within the Greenbelt. And highlighted in orange are the properties that we've helped protect. Cumulatively, that amounts to over 20% of the farmland within the Greenbelt District having been protected to date. So now let's talk about safeguarding our waters. This was one of the fundamental pieces to the vision of the original Greenbelt Millage. Natural landscapes play a crucial role in collecting and filtering water to our waterways, rivers, and eventually to the city of Ann Arbor's faucets. The alternative to those natural landscapes comes with significant risks of runoff and pollution. So by keeping the green infrastructure intact, It's estimated that the Greenbelt's work has caused an estimated annual reduction of over 120,000 pounds of total suspended solids, 4,200 pounds of nitrogen, and 768 pounds of phosphorus from entering our waterways each year by keeping that green infrastructure intact, as opposed to it being converted to single-family housing. We've also helped preserve over 1,500 acres of Mother Nature's most effective filter, our wetlands, and helped protect over 19 miles of river, stream, and waterway frontage, 60% of which is located within the Huron River watershed. And finally, let's talk about open space, recreation, and biodiversity. The Greenbelt program has helped establish 10 new public nature preserves, totaling over 642 acres. Those nature preserves contain over 6 miles of publicly accessible hiking trails. We've helped preserve over 1,200 acres of woodlands, preserving regional habitat and sequestering carbon. And all in all, of the $23 million invested in land protection, over 10.5 has been invested in publicly accessible open space around the city of Ann Arbor. So over the last 15 years, since 2003, we've seen the Greenbelt's vision actually manifest into what I would argue is a successful program, one that we should be extremely proud of because it's in our backyard and also at a national scale in the national context of what we've been able to achieve. But we've been talking at a fairly high level on the landscape level, so let's bring it down to the ground and take a look at some of the examples of what we've helped accomplish. So Green Things Farm is in Ann Arbor Township, and the previous owner protected the property, and the new farmers bought at a more affordable price. And it was a partnership between Washtenaw County, Ann Arbor Township, and the Greenbelt program to see the property protected. So that's an example of private land protection. Here's an example of public land protection. So in 2018, we helped Legacy Land Conservancy, a regional nonprofit land conservancy, acquire 25 acres of land in Salem Township, high-quality Mesic Southern Forest and Buttonbush Swamp, which is vulnerable and relatively rare in the region. And this partnership is where the county contributed 50% of the funding to the acquisition, and the Greenbelt contributed 50% of the funding. And then Legacy Land Conservancy is the one owning and operating it as a public nature preserve. So all of this work has been guided to date by a strategic plan. The last update to our strategic plan was in 2013, and that's why we're all here today, is to collect feedback about what has gone right in the first 15 years and what to look forward to in the next. So the two main pieces of the current strategic plan of the Greenbelt can be broken into preservation strategies versus programmatic strategies. In terms of preservation strategy, there's two buckets, farmland and open space. Open space translates to any natural area preservation efforts. But within farmland, we place great emphasis on building 1,000-acre blocks because we would like to reduce farmland fragmentation, which can stress farmers because of resource sharing and making farming more viable long into the future by having contiguous blocks in single areas. We focus on protecting land within farmland complexes that have been designated by the Greenbelt Commission. That map on the wall illustrates those farmland complexes. They are areas of specific interest where we hope to see more work done and have the highest potential for achieving 1,000-acre block protection. And finally, we put some emphasis on local food and new farmers, and it's a topic that's garnered increased attention over the life of the program. And while we do have some focus on it, it has not necessarily translated into adopting it into the Greenbelt scoring system yet. And then in terms of open space priorities, we definitely have an emphasis on source water protection, so any tributaries or main stem land protection projects along the Huron River. Any notable view sheds in the community on highly traveled roads leading into the city or out of the city, or other notable landscapes important to the community or surrounding communities, and then an emphasis on recreation and publicly accessible lands. And then programmatically, City Council and the Greenbelt Commission are very proud of the leverage that we've been able to achieve with the city taxpayer dollars. To date, we're averaging about 1-to-1 matching, either from our partners at the local, state, or federal level. So there's a great emphasis on securing matching funds for the purchase of development right projects that we work on. And then finally, this work right here, education and outreach, letting folks know what is the Greenbelt program, how does it function, and then outreach on how to improve it. So we have over 1,700 acres of projects in the pipeline currently and 15 years of the millage left. So this opportunity, I invite us all to reflect on the positive impact we've had, but think critically about where we can improve, expand, or focus over the next 15 years.
Thank you. So in just a moment, we're going to talk about this. What is your vision? I did want to orient you to, if you flip over your agenda, on the back side, you have sort of a cheat sheet on the previous strategic plan, which might be helpful to reference in the conversations. Next thing we'd like to do is ask, are there questions for Remy? Questions of clarification about his presentation?
So I'm not the most geographically inclined person for this area, but does Ypsilanti fall into this green belt space?
It does not. Yep. So when the millage was, it's my understanding that when the millage was originally passed, townships were engaged at some level and asked whether or not they wanted to participate in this program. And Ypsilanti Township in the city of Ypsilanti said no, which is why you see that jut out around the city and the township.
So sorry, I have a couple other questions. So I gotta pull it up. So what kind of, can you go into, I guess, more depth, like the support that's provided to farmers beyond just like the cheaper land? You get further education, ways to make sure that you have a greater chance of success? Because I know like nowadays we just hear a lot about farmers are having a lot of issues because of different policies that are happening at the national level.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what we do to help make sure that they actually succeed. And also the education and outreach, like I know this is part of that process, but the part that I'm trying to figure out is like, is part of that also involve creating activists and supporters so that they actually are not just friendly toward this engagement, but also becoming future farmers, right? Because the reason why I was asking about Ypsilanti is that, I don't know if you've come across Melvin Parsons before. Yeah, so he might be someone worthwhile for this team to maybe look into, but he has been trying to set up a farm in Ypsilanti Township with one of the main purposes is to provide an environment for folks that are coming out of the prison pipeline to get them involved in something that gets their hands dirty, gets them into the earth, and also provides them a job that they can hopefully get back into society. And also was to involve students in the K through 12 system to get them all, especially in the 48197, 48198 area, involved in something that gives them potentially some hope or a path forward that they can have a future job in something else. The reason why I was asking about Ypsilanti is because, like I said, he's been trying for a while to get land there, and he keeps running into all these different roadblocks. And he's got like Zingerman's, all these other different restaurants in the area that support him, but he needs land. And the current land that he has is too small. And there was a plot of land, actually it was a school that they were thinking of actually knocking down to give to him. And then there was a neighbor that had a fit over that, frankly, because she didn't want black people near her house. And so I'm trying to figure out, is there ways that we could potentially find land for him here? I mean, he's got customers, he's got drive, he's got ability to produce, but he's not being able to meet his needs of just even having earth to sow.
Yeah. Several of the Greenbelt commissioners can chime in on this answer, but I'll just start programmatically. Or the millage is governed by an ordinance that kind of lays out in black and white what is and is not allowed in terms of city staff time to invest in efforts related to farmland preservation, and it's truly limited to farmland preservation or land preservation as a whole. It doesn't take the next step. There's nothing in the millage that would fund efforts to backing educational programming for new and beginning farmers, small and low interest loan programs, intergenerational transfer, succession planning, land access coordination in terms of I'm aware of a farmer going and I'm trying to hook them up. All of that is outside of the purview of the actual millage itself, which just says protect the fundamental piece, the farm itself, and then some other organization is going to need to step up and do the coordination and the organizing on behalf of all those other topics, some of which are addressed by the Natural Resource Conservation Service, NRCS and USDA, others by nonprofit agencies. But ultimately, we are hamstrung to just limit ourselves to the land preservation efforts itself. But in terms of what does a farmer get out of that, that is the development rights purchase. And that's where the millage funds are going is you own a 100-acre farm in the Greenbelt District. You'd like to see it preserved in perpetuity. How the process works is they submit an application to the program, and if the Greenbelt Commission finds that it's a competitive or interesting application, we will go ahead and commission an appraisal of the development rights value. And so on that 100-acre farm, you could be looking at anywhere from $2,000 an acre upwards of $8,000 an acre for the development rights value. And then that's what's being purchased in exchange for the permanent preservation agreement that is being agreed upon between the city and the landowner. So with those funds, they're able to either retire, reinvest the funds in the farming operation, or diversify and change markets if they need that initial investment to help them adapt and get into a new market. But otherwise, they were sitting on that piece of property and all the value of it was locked in the land and could not be extracted otherwise without selling it entirely. So this is one way to, while they still own the land, extract some value of it and reinvest either in their well-being personally or the farm operations well-being long-term. Yeah.
This is just more for education for me. So if I understand correctly, the only way that this currently is allowed to work is that it has to be existing land that's used for farming. You can't convert existing land to farms. Like if it's not used for farming, like say there's a building on some property and they're like, well, it's just full of trees or it's full of stuff, you can't raise it and turn it into farmland and be able to participate in this?
You can. There are some things that would need to happen prior. One, if say, for example, there was a 40-acre woodlot and someone hoped that that would be farmed, all those trees would need to be cut down prior to any agreement held with us. Once it's a farm, it's something we might be interested in working toward, but that's up to the discretion of the Greenbelt Advisory Commission to decide what is a competitive or is not a competitive project, because we do have a large pipeline of projects to consider. And then it also needs to be competitive in terms of its potential for securing matching funds, which every program is different in what they will or will not fund, and it depends on the location. But finally, there are several different factors that go into the selection process and the scoring process to rank these properties. So just because it is an active farm, the Greenbelt Advisory Commission has had to pass on certain applications because of where they fit in the mix of priorities at any given moment. So it's not a guarantee if someone applies that it will proceed. And there are existing structures on some farms currently, like on Roseanne's farm, there's a home and several barns and all the farm infrastructure necessary to operate the farm, and that area is excluded from the area that's preserved with the program.
I want to take a minute for the folks who came in late to introduce themselves and who you are and what drew you here this evening.
Hello, I'm Stephanie Stoffer. I'm a Greenbelt Advisory Commission member. I am also a farmer and sociologist. And I just want to say thank you, Remy. It's always good to hear this presentation. It's very helpful. Thanks again.
Hello, I'm Ryan from, I own a farm, Radical Roots Community Farm. And I've been working or using conservation land for about the past 5 years in the area. So tied to it, and I was at Tillian and other ones I can get into it, Slow Farm. But anyways, so I'm just here to voice my gratitude for the Greenbelt Commission and everything. So anyways.
but does everyone want to say their name real quick? Just.
I'm Robert.
And I know you, but my name's Anika. Nice to meet you. Okay, what other questions do you have for Emmy?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about the local food and new farmers criterion and like how that's operationalized?
There is none.
Okay. So, okay.
It's written into the strategic plan. In closed session, when Greenbelt Advisory Commission is considering projects, it's certainly something that would push us over the edge if, say, the actual score in numbers was lower than, say, is usually desirable. It's one of those factors that pushes it over the edge. It has a compelling story. Certainly, we've heard from the community in this process that local food and new farmers is a topic of concern to them and a priority. So I think through this current strategic planning update process, we're going to see that that emphasis remain, and not just remain, but finally translate into a weighted score within our system that will score those properties. They're typically smaller, but they'll have a greater weight that could push them to a competitive edge against a 200-acre farm or something that comes in the pipeline. Yes.
Yeah, so we actually started redoing the scoring process right before this process happened, and we decided to put a pause because we wanted to make sure we got all the feedback before we move forward. But that's something that we're obviously really interested as a local food farmer myself. Diversified vegetables is what I do. That's something that's really important, and I know for many people, including Ryan, many other farmers, land access, as you mentioned, is a really difficult thing in the county, especially as acreage values go up exponentially very rapidly. Yeah. So that's definitely something we're looking to incorporate a lot more. And maybe, I don't know if you should explain a little bit more about the application process, because when you're saying like go up against a 200-acre parcel, that might make sense to us, but maybe you should unpack that a little bit.
Sure, sure. So the Greenbelt program accepts applications on a rolling basis. There's no annual deadline. And so any landowner within the Greenbelt district is welcome to submit an application. Anyone that has 2 acres or 200 acres can submit an application, but it will first be received by staff. I'll have an initial conversation with the landowner and try and talk about their goals and their ultimate plans for the property. And then I will take it through our scoring system, which is currently online. Anyone can view it. And then I will score the property, and then I will take it to the Greenbelt Advisory Commission, who will meet in closed session to protect the anonymity of the landowner at that time, where they will make their initial recommendation of whether or not it's a priority at this time. There are times where the commission will say put a hold on it, and we'll pick it up if other things clear out of our project pipeline that we're currently working on. Other times it'll be yes, go, and commission an appraisal of the development rights now, and let's proceed. Or sometimes it'll be an outright rejection and weed it out entirely. So there are no minimum cutoffs. That might be something that comes out of this strategic planning process as well. Right now I can accept an application from a 2-acre property, while in practice that has never made it to forth to consideration. There may be some conversation around minimum cutoffs or depending on other factors associated with the property, like is it a local food producing farm. But as Stephanie mentioned, we are considering local food as a factor in how it weighs into our scoring system now, but there's also a lot of conversation around how do you define that, which is very difficult, because you can grow local grain that then goes to the aggregator and then goes outward, and we're working on that portion as well in terms of definitions.
And just to better understand the scope of like what you're seeking input on, am I right that it's not just how you score things, but other things? So one of the things that I'm really interested in, and Remy and I have had lots of conversations about, is like what you allow, what's treated as development, like what has to be in that. And this is where solar panels kind of come in. Like, is that considered development, or is that part of the farm? Right. And so is that something that you're all that you also want to open up at this time? Is that something that you can open up at this? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's we're open to any suggestions. Like, these are the buckets. You can, in your mind, say none of those are relevant to my concerns or interests, so wipe them away and start clean with your own slate of priorities. But yeah, strategically, we need to have a conversation, I think, or it's with certain state level actions that are taking place with PA 116, which is the state farmland tax credit, preservation tax credit program, allowing for solar panels on the property. It's certainly relevant to our discussion. I can tell you, though, that if we have a project where we are protecting a farm and it's of any considerable size, I'd say 80 acres and above, in all likelihood, we're going to be seeking federal matching funds. And the strings that come with those federal matching funds say absolutely no solar panels for any off-farm energy production.
Yeah.
So there's been some feedback from folks like me upward through the chain at the Fed level saying, hey, you should think about this. And then it gets lost at the head of USDA, and they go, great, thanks for the feedback. We're just going to continue on. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So for the properties that the Greenbelt has protected either alone ourselves, which is rare, I can't think of too many properties where that's happened, or in partnership with a township, between us at the local level, we could potentially have a conversation about working into the agreements an allowance for renewable energy that produces enough energy to sell off site. But any project where there's federal funds involved will be hamstrung to be able to actually incorporate that.
God, I was just thinking actually at some of those smaller farms. I'm not,
Yeah.
like, I'm not a farmer, but where there's an opportunity, potentially it's to still be community solar, but grow things underneath. You're not going to hand harvest on
Yeah.
1,000 acres.
You have, like, on most farms where there's a farmstead, there probably are 5 acres that are exempted out, that aren't included.
Yeah.
And so, and those actually big roofs are probably ideal for solar panels, right? Or no?
They are. I mean, everybody wants economies of scale. And so, well, we could talk
Keep
for
going.
days.
Keep going.
So right now what we see in this state is solar developers are looking for either 10 or 15 to 20 acres for these small, like 2 megawatt systems, or they're looking for, and I'm not kidding you, 1,500 acres. And so, like, I care about farmland preservation in all of the many, right? Like, we mean many things. We're trying to preserve lots and lots of things. And that, like, gives me pause. I'm not going to lie. Like, 1,500 acres of solar. But Washtenaw County is a place where it's possible, actually, to have these things coexist. That you're not going to see that at scale. Like, I don't think that you're going to see that at 3,000 acre kind of scale. But I think that there's an opportunity, and there's an opportunity because there's so much money in solar. I mean, solar developers are leasing land for $800 an acre a year. Like, that's a good opportunity for a farmer so to potentially make the funds go farther. And again, because we're thinking strategically, like, maybe it's not this program, but maybe that's a third bucket of, like, how can you extend even the reach by thinking, I mean, the city has a climate action plan. The city is trying to get solar locally. And so, like, that takes land. There's not enough land in the city of Ann Arbor for that. And so, like, I think there's a lot, that's just adding another, I think one of the challenges is it's adding another demand onto the farmland. Sorry, but that was not a clarification question. Now I went off on my rant.
Well, I struggle with that. I think it's a worthwhile goal of the program to preserve the prime and unique soils that are available in this community, because those are really where, as climate adaptation is necessary and resilience, those are the soils that are going to help get us through some harder times. Whereas the really marginal farmland, I would hope a solar developer would place a premium in their own thoughtful sustainability efforts to go and seek marginal farmland versus the prime stuff that's going to get us through adaptation. That is probably beyond the scope of the ordinance and for us to advocate for. So I think sticking with our strategy of large blocks of contiguous prime farmland but it, again, that takes one of the opportunities to preserve farming as a livelihood off the table, and that's not lost on us, I don't think.
I was going to say, I know Green Things is a small little
Mhm.
store, and I'd be interested to know if that's within their footprint of exclusion.
Oh, I bet it's within the exclusion.
It is right in that area.
It's right by their
I don't know
house.
what it is doing both, though.
Yeah.
And is in the Greenbelt.
Yeah,
Maybe ask them how they went through it, or
yeah.
that might be a good follow-up.
Mm-hmm.
So before we go too far in depth on, if we could rework these strategic buckets and what we might prioritize, let's first talk about vision. 10 years, it's 10 years from now. The Greenbelt's being benchmarked all over the country. It's had such a positive effect on our community. What's been accomplished? If you imagine this future state, what's been accomplished? What's happening because of the Greenbelt strategies and approaches? What would be the end outcome in an ideal scenario?
Planning to do an early vote to extend the millage.
Planning to extend the millage. Why? What did the whole thing accomplish?
Well, I would think that we're not going to wait. I would think we're not going to wait for 2033 to renew the millage. It would probably be best extended 2 to 4 years ahead of that time. And so, with 5 years left to go, I think we should be planning to figure out the language that we need to extend the millage.
And if we think about that future state, what's been so wildly successful that it makes the case for extending the millage? What is the whole project in its almost 30 years accomplished?
We have retired a sizable amount of farmland development rights, but there's still so much more to do.
What else? Lots of land protected. Raise your hand and we'll pass.
I think we have sort of changed the vision that agriculture is a viable economic business in this county, in the area around the Greenbelt, whereas I think before the Greenbelt, people really didn't see how there would be the land base to have agriculture continue in this area. So it sort of changed the vision, so to speak, of what was possible.
I think, the program, like we said, is should be nationally known. I think that would be one of the things, is that it gets passed on. You start seeing Ypsilanti maybe join in the club, and other people looking at this model of how to conserve land.
So surrounding communities and national, following our lead, right? So then the impact might be even bigger than right here locally, but
Absolutely.
the others who might copycat. Especially want to give the 3 non-GAC members an opportunity to speak, because I know the GAC members have multiple opportunities to weigh in. What do you see as a future vision, big success?
So I think if it's actually a belt, like if there's actually something that's contiguous rather than bits and pieces, I think that that's one of the things that makes this particularly unique. You're already seeing that. That's not something that happens every place that has this. You can't possibly protect all the land. And so I think the contiguity of it.
Why is the contiguity valuable?
The contiguity is valuable both from because of the multiple benefits that farmland provides. So like if you're thinking about it as wildlife corridors, right? Like you have that. If you're thinking about it in terms of, I did a project in Webster Township and people were talking about if we get too many people living here, they're going to complain about our tractors on the road. And so if there's enough agricultural activity in an area, right? I don't want to say economies of scale. It's more that there's strength in numbers. And so I think pockets of protection isn't as valuable ecologically for just that sense of togetherness as having some contiguity.
So I actually have two questions, which will help me kind of figure out what I think I would like to see as part of the vision. One, do we have more farmers than farmland right now? Like, do we have people knocking on the door saying, like, I want to be a farmer, but I don't have farmland, right? Because we do. Okay.
Yes, I get. So in the year that I've been at the Greenbelt, I've fielded that call already about 5 times from new and beginning farmers, finding the website and saying, I need your help to find land, and then me delivering relatively bad news. That's not something I have authority to use my time doing. And then previous to working for the Greenbelt, I worked for one of the regional land conservancies, and in my 4 years there, I got that call dozens of times. I mean, it's not necessarily more farmers than land itself. It's more farmers than affordable land itself.
So I'd say maybe that, I mean, that might be already part of your vision, but that would be something I would put on there is those that want to farm have affordable land to farm.
I think I'm with you 100%. How I was going to say that, I don't typically say things at these things. I try not to because I want to leave it to all you guys. But I hope that in 5 or 10 years, between the national recognition and the surrounding communities' recognition, and the increase in the density of protected land, we make it unavoidable to prioritize a land access program. And I know that the Greenbelt in its current form will not be able to spearhead that, but I think we make the case so strongly by having such a dense landscape of protected land that there has to be, we force a meaningful conversation to a regional nonprofit or to another entity that doesn't exist or an agency like MSU Extension, to where they have no choice but to go, have you seen what's going on in Washtenaw County? We need to address staff time and resources to helping getting these retiring farmers on these protected lands hooked up with a new generation. So it's not something we will lead the conversation on, but we will inevitably push that conversation to the forefront of people's minds.
That's great. So my second question, and I guess this probably goes to the 3 of you that are farmers, is like, do you actually feel you have the appropriate support to succeed, whether it's from this organization or any other organization? Because the reason why I'm asking that is, as you said, like there's 15 years this millage expires, and as you stated before, you have specific swim lanes that you're allowed to basically stay in between. Is that worth now maybe trying to start planning ahead that when that millage comes up again, it maybe expands your purview of what you can do to better support this community, especially if the other organizations out there aren't really providing the support that they need in order to actually be viable, succeed, and not be stressed out all the time about like the stuff that they really shouldn't be stressed out about?
Well, yeah, I guess I don't expect the Greenbelt to provide a program for that. And I think what they're doing, and what Remy just said, was that in an example of we create all this green space and then have another regional nonprofit show up. Tillian was that. So it was an incubator farm. And so there, at its height, there was like 10 or 12 different farm operations there. And I participated there for 4 years. So, those properties, just the fact that it was in conservation, it would have been, it would be a subdivision right now. And it was slated to be so. But, so it's, the Greenbelt is, what they're saying is that they're conserving, they're sending a message to the community, and I think that's as far as I expect them to take it. And just because I don't believe, there's just too much, that's hard to do a whole program, and that's something I don't think the taxpayers are going to get super behind. I think that, just the open space and the fact that they know that those plots of land will be conserved for farmers already is enough. There's already a ton of spaces that they've created, and that I've participated at, and Tillian, Sealy Farm, who has a conservation easement. A lot of people that have farmed at conservation and they've gone on to conserve their land. So I feel like it kind of just builds momentum, but anyways, that's all I'll say about it.
Such a great question. I'd love to hear your answers as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would dovetail a lot with what Ryan was saying. I think the most support we can get is if we have the land. I mean, that's pretty much the number one barrier to me right now. This is my 10th season farming, and not in any of those seasons did I own the land that I was using. So just to be able to have the stability of a place that is affordable in the county, truthfully speaking, I can't afford farmland locally. And if it weren't for the program, there'd be really no way for anyone in my position. So yeah, I think, again, the most important support the Greenbelt can give us is making the land more affordable and accessible and preserving it in a good condition.
Sorry, I don't mean to put you on the
No,
spot.
no, that's all right. I mean, we bought our farm in 1982, so obviously our position is very different from people trying to start out. I do think that there are a lot of programs available for beginning farmers, and I think, unfortunately, people aren't very aware of them. They aren't communicated well because, for example, like farmers, what is FSA? FSA has a loan program of low-interest loans. They'll partner with other lenders. If you don't have a down payment, they'll take the first position so that 50% is at risk, so there's very little risk to the lender. There are programs like that for beginning farmers. You have to get on a list. Of course, funds are always in short supply, but still, even if you have low-interest loans, you have to have affordable land. You can't be paying $10,000 an acre and ever have a viable operation. So, but I think a lot of young beginning farmers aren't aware of some of those programs. The other thing is, of course, Michigan State's Cooperative Extension Service, and although their funds have been cut dramatically in the past 5 years, they do still have, you still have the university entomologists, soil scientists that can help, with evaluating helping a beginning farmer evaluate whether the land is suitable for what they're doing and sort of help them be able to put together budgets, that kind of thing. So I think those services are there. Unfortunately, I don't think a lot of people know about them.
So can I say one more thing? That it sounds like a good vision, based especially on this map up here, is like, I'm just throwing numbers out there, is 40% of available land is for farm, and whatever, 50% or 60% is available for parks. Like, I don't know if you have those kind of percentage targets based on the available land that's out there, because then at least you have a goal that you're driving toward of some conversion that you're trying to achieve.
And so you're talking about the percentage that goes to farmland versus protected public land?
Yeah, because you have 87,000 acres in the Greenbelt area. Like, is there some certain percentage of that overall come the year 2033, I think, that you want to have as parks, and then some percentage of that you want to have converted to this protected farmland area?
So I can just say that no, there's no written target, and I think that can be attributed to two primary things. One being the market for development rights is in fluctuation, so we could get a lot less when the prices are high versus during the recession. We were able to actually protect a lot of land because prices were lower, so our dollars went further. The other thing being it's a millage, so it's based on property tax revenue. So our revenue to get the work done has been contingent on that and its growth over the years. So what may have initially been projected as the total millage revenue over the 30 years was totally wiped away during the recession as that large, maybe we'll get 80 million that was like early on, that's what it was thought to be. But the recession took a lot of that opportunity away. So total millage revenue might now be closer to 50 to 60 million. So that's a considerable drop. So if you aim here, they're the two major variables keeping you from potentially getting there. It's not that there shouldn't be a target. I think up until recently, we had the total acres that we've protected, but only at this process of the 15-year mark did we finally run the analysis of how much farmland we've protected. So with the 87,000 acres in the district, only 25,000 of that is farmland, and 5,000 of that is farmland we've helped protect. So the 20% mark. So the Greenbelt Commission could say success looks like 40%. Double it with 15 years left. But again, we can set that mark, but two major things are going to determine whether or not we reach it.
Was part of the question also about public access, like how much of the land, and so can you speak to sort of the approach or the challenges to acquiring full-on purchasing
Right.
the property that then has to be administered by another party?
Anyone chime in as well, because I can just keep talking. But so we could place, currently there's no allocated amount of the Greenbelt's budget that says 75% is for farmland preservation and 25% is for open space land preservation, or 50% is for purchase of development rights and 50% is contributing toward adding new public nature preserves to the area. We don't have those allocations internally. We have been a relatively opportunistic program, taking applications as they come in. The challenge with publicly accessible lands is the incentive to the purchase of development rights is that the landowner gets to keep owning the property and farming, and they get to continue their livelihood on the property. But woodlots, high quality woodlots that would be worth acquiring for public rec are few and far between at this point in such a fragmented and degraded landscape in this relatively urbanized region. So the opportunities are fewer and far between. Also, the long-term costs associated with managing that land are not covered by the millage funds to acquire the property. So while it might cost $1 million to actually acquire the 40 acres to make it a publicly accessible area, the long-term stewardship, whoever takes that on, if it's Washtenaw County that ends up actually managing it as a public preserve, their long-term staff costs for trail maintenance, woodlot management, programming, educational programming, parking lots, all of it, it gets added on to and goes into a budget category that is not covered by acquisition millage dollars. So that's very difficult to budget for. So there's some reluctance to add more and more and more public land with less and less and less dollars to effectively manage it for the public's benefit when you're saying you're a responsible steward of that land. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Or
Well, I
Tammy.
was just following up on this, an observation from here. I was actually surprised by how much of the money went to public land acquisition because we have a whole lot of entities that are working, we have a metro park system, we have fantastic city parks, right? Like, there's not tons of other people working in the farmland space, and so I can understand public saying this is public dollars, I want access, but we've got a lot of that.
Yeah.
And so I was actually surprised. I had no idea how much of that money that was there went to the public lands.
Interesting, from past sessions, we have both heard people comment, I'm done with the public land. There's enough. There's a great enough density in the city, outside the city, surrounding. We got the metro parks, the state parks, Waterloo, Pinckney, all the county preserves. Stop. And we've had other people go, yeah, I don't really care about farmland preservation. I'd like to see more public parks added. So both of those voices are coming to these tables. So it's interesting to be hearing both again. It's
Sorry.
But actually, I'm glad you asked that because it ties into my next question, which was, is this kind of like vacation time, right? You have to use it or lose it each year, or are you allowed to bank the dollars?
they're banked.
Okay.
Yep.
Because that, I was wondering, is when you talk about the prices of the per acre going up and then recession, it goes down. According to economics, they say around year 2022 and around 2028, 29, there are going to be some dips in the economy, and it sounds like those might be good times then to basically have this money and not necessarily push it toward all these public access stuff and just bank it,
Yep.
so that you can just snag up all this land in those particular times.
Yeah, and that'll be, again, like the first time the recession came through during the Greenbelt's history. Again, we're opportunistic. We can't force a landowner into it. So maybe in this recession, landowners go, I'm just going to hold, I'm going to hold, I'm going to hold. I don't want to sell the development rights. It was that this last time, by the circumstances of that time, there was a wave of interest. We can never guarantee that that'll happen again. So,
Yeah, my experience, I was on the tail end of the recession when I came on to GAC almost 6 years ago, and there were rock bottom prices, but there were fewer people participating.
yeah,
And I think part of the reason we're seeing an uptick now is because property values are rebounding,
yeah.
and certainly there was a lot of activity very early in the Greenbelt's history, right? Because one of the things they did was they bonded the millage. So yeah, I don't even know the economics behind it, but they took out a loan against the payments coming in, and so they had a lot of money to play with, and spent a lot at the high end of the market. Right before the boom, right before the bust. My experience on the Greenbelt is that it very much is a flux, and one of the challenges is that we evaluate individual projects as they come in. We're kind of looking at them against the past, but we're not really looking at them competitively against each other because they tend to come in sequentially, and we aren't really looking at them against the future. And some of that is good because it feels like you're really evaluating the project on its own merits or against what what the scoring says. But what I've also felt is that we haven't had the degree of kind of strategic planning in there that one might ideally wish. And some of that just reflects the conditions of the ordinance and of the process that makes it really hard in a volunteer program to go after the prime soils or to go after farms in transition or, to go after X, Y, and Z that might be recognized as public, as in the public interest, but that just aren't really workable under the conditions of the ordinance. We just do it on the appraisal.
The appraisal.
And so the landowner has to agree that they're going to accept the appraised price on the land. No.
Correct. Yep, we can go below.
Yeah, right, with a landowner contribution. Yeah.
Yep, the millage dictates fair market value as appraised is what we can offer.
I wonder if anyone has any additions to what we put up here for future vision before we move on to strategic priorities. So to recap, 10 years from now, a lot of land has been protected and farmland has been conserved. We've helped to protect the viability of agriculture in the region. Surrounding communities and national communities are following our lead. There's contiguous land providing wildlife corridors, a critical mass of agricultural activity, strength in numbers, ecological benefits. There's affordable land for those who want, thank you, affordable land for those who want to enter farming. We've inspired spin-off work by others to support farmers entering the field. The millage renewal has been supported, and high quality farmland is being preserved. And then we had this sort of question mark on our vision about, is there a specific vision for balance of farmland versus public access? So that question's still open if anyone wants to weigh in, or do you have additional items to add to the vision?
Can I just add one item really quickly? It's just emerged out of your really lovely recap and things that I heard here tonight that I just didn't hear in the other two sessions I've attended. But if we, just in terms of thinking about the vision, in 2003, the advocates and and promoters of this original ordinance were doing something visionary around land conservation. And lo and behold, they pulled it off. It's really interesting in light of what you said about renewable energy and what you said about new and beginning farmers to think about not just a renewal of a straight up land conservation millage, but some really novel piece, and I hate to say it's like big government, but some really novel piece of visionary local, if not legislation, at least an initiative that gets at this challenge, the challenge of climate change, the challenge of renewable energy, the challenge of management of our natural resources, that's right here at the nexus of a growing, emerging local food market and the next generation of farmers, right? So maybe if the vision is in 10 years, at some point the work that we've done here cumulatively has led to something else really innovative and different that should be a shining light to the rest of the country around what we can do in this space to create a more sustainable, humane future. Yeah?
Thanks. I'll just use both. Yeah, and this is something I was talking about, I think, at our last meeting, is that it's great that we have this program as is right now, but the fact that it is tied to interest of the landowner, I think is always going to be our Achilles heel. Because how do you convince somebody when they could get a certain amount for their land, do the moral thing and preserve it and get less than you would for a developer. So I would love to see part of that vision you're talking about involve people that aren't necessarily landholders. And I don't know if that's a citywide thing, but I feel like people would have a lot more stake in it if it wasn't just a decision that could be made by people that own the land already. So I don't know what that looks like though.
Well, and one of the things that's really tricky here is that the conversation that we're having today is not the city. It's not, it's all of these other governments, right? The project that I worked with in Webster Township was trying to figure out how they change their zone, like should they make changes to their zoning to help make that go farther? Because, if you allow for 2-acre lots, then the development potential is much higher, right? You can divide that 100-acre farm into many more potential houses than if it's 10-acre lots. Exactly. And so I think, and this is in terms of what that vision is, this is the challenge everywhere on these programs, is that it's a regional vision, because except for Oregon, we don't plan regionally, right? All of the farmland preservation has to be this, there's an opportunity actually for this urban rural, conversation to happen here. And so I think that's fantastic. I mean, if you're going to add to that list, right, I think one of the challenges that we'll continue to have is, and that I've heard recently, and it's a critique of Greenbelt programs as they're envisioned, is they can't be forever, but how much of now do you have leapfrog development, right? You have this donut, how does what's preserved here, what does it look like over time? And how can it adapt to what the size of the city is and who's coming in? And how can those preserved lands, whether they're farmland or what I worry about honestly with the critical habitat stuff is is that possible? We know we've got climate change baked into our system. Are those going to survive? And what do you do when they don't? So I think I think it would be great if we could think even beyond just this program and how this really, because there's so much land involved in this, right? And because it's already, I mean, this is the teacher learning from the student, how much it's inspired, how it really is a model. I hadn't really thought of it before. The collaboration that goes on. I think that there is something there that could be that we can draw upon that other places just haven't had the opportunity to. And we have the resources, right? I mean, we have taxpayers who've said, for 30 years, we're going to tax ourselves to pay for things that are not entirely in our,
Aren't at all in our city.
Exactly, right? So,
And at least one council person has been very much against this for that reason.
yeah, but we really like when people come in to like see Ann Arbor as like surrounded by, yeah.
Can I say one thing? I think that as you look at the map, I think the townships that have their own millages, who are very active in farmland preservation, they know the people in the community, they know who to approach to bring that in, that I think this reflects how important that is. If we could get more townships involved, I think that would just have a huge impact. And I don't know exactly how you do that, but.
That's a good segue
I have
to
one idea.
strategy.
Strategy. So in terms of engaging with townships, I'll just say that the map up on the screen, you can see in 2000, when we were just getting started, we needed some guidance of where our priorities were geographically. So the Greenbelt Advisory Commission had established these farmland complexes, which were supposed to act as the guidance of where we really wanted to focus investment in land conservation. So you have a Webster-Scio complex in Northfield, Ann Arbor, and so on. And then reasonably, you see that it does cut some of the areas that are a lost cause kind of out of the picture in terms of bang for our buck or staff investment in getting a project done. But that was 2003 or 2005, 2006, after the millage was passed. But here we are today in 2019. We've got a very, very good understanding of what direction land conservation's heading in each of the respective regions of this map. So in terms of meaningfully engaging with townships, we heard at a previous session that yes, initially when the millage was passed, townships were asked, do you want to participate in this? And the ones that said yes are the ones that are included in the Greenbelt District. But there was nothing after that. There was no, what's your master plan say? And how can we line up with your work and make sure that our efforts are running parallel to each other, not counter? So one thing that has been suggested at prior sessions is moving away from farmland complexes and moving toward parcel level prioritization, targeting specific parcels across the entire map that help us build 1,000-acre blocks, contiguous protected land, focus on prime ag soils, and then help, as Sarah mentioned, fill in the gaps and actually get closer to achieving a green belt in actual, the visual of it, which is very difficult in the real estate market, but we can at least have that goal. So farmland complexes were good guidance and bumpers to work with early on, but several folks in sessions have said we need to move away from them and start actually running a parcel level analysis to find the best of what's left and actually mail to them, target them, solicit, no more of a passive approach. But before doing that, take those township by township priorities and vet them with either the land preservation boards, their planning commissions, or the board of trustees as a whole, so that they feel like they've been brought in the strategic loop about how the Greenbelt might play out in their community for the next 15 years. And I'll stop talking.
All right, we are going to shift to priorities because we're moving that way organically. You all have a worksheet called Priorities for Future Greenbelt Investments. And I'll point out to you that the items that are already included, 1,000-acre blocks, farmland complexes, local food here on River Viewshed, and recreation and accessibility, that's the previous strategic plan. So we carried those over. And then there are these lines beneath for other. So, oh my God, thank you. So the other lines would be places to put new priorities that weren't included last time. And what we'd like you to do is to think of how you would prioritize Greenbelt investments. And the way we've set this up is you have 10 points, and you can allocate your 10 points across any of the existing priority items or any of the other. And I'll prompt you to use a pencil. because the first activity is to rate as you see it from your own perspective, but thinking about the greatest common good. And then we'll discuss, and then you have a chance to reallocate as you wish. We would like to collect these at the end because we'll determine the aggregate scoring across all of the sessions. So again, if you would reflect individually on how you would allocate the points, and folks who are on the GAC, you can play along, but don't leave the form if you've already given me one at another session. The rest of you can leave yours so that we can tally them. Questions?
I do have one.
Yes.
On the 100-acre block, or
Mhm.
the 1,000-acre blocks,
Mhm.
this is not a 1,000-acre new parcel. This is prioritizing, creating, amassing parcels together. So that's the contiguity kind of thing. Okay, great.
Another question?
Yeah, so Huron River, are there other organizations already focused on that? That's what I thought, right?
But
Okay.
not on the actual protection of land touching the Huron.
Oh,
They advocate for water policy, engagement, education, but actual protecting the land, they do not do. Huron Water Trail. Yeah, right.
And I would note that in all the previous sessions, multiple people suggested scrapping the words Huron River and saying water protection, that they wanted a broader wording there. So if that's, feel free to use that language as well. Other questions about these items before you allocate your points? Okay, so let's just take a few minutes then. 10 points, allocate it as you wish, and feel free to write in other priorities. So the question, I think, is about the difference between 1,000-acre blocks and farmland complexes, which also comes, I just want to normalize this. This comes up a lot as well because it's confusing for most of us. Do you want to?
Yeah, the difference being, as you said, 1,000-acre blocks is the prioritization of lands to build contiguous protected areas, while farmland complexes is the guidance of where we should emphasize protection within the Greenbelt District. So again, that existed prior to there being a map full of potential 1,000-acre blocks to build onto. It was sort of an empty map, and that was sort of our guidelines. So some folks have been scratching farmland complexes and writing in parcel priorities or parcel level priorities, so that it targeted parcel priorities or something along those lines to say, yes, building 1,000-acre blocks is important, but specific parcels that have 100% prime ag left on them are ones that we should be targeting regardless of if they're next to already protected properties, things like that. So it's giving additional layer of guidance to what we should focus on.
That's a good example of
Geographically.
potentially competing priorities, right? They may
Right.
overlap, but they might not be the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can I ask a question? Yeah. I've done my rating, but this is more about how things operate. So a couple of times prime land has come up. Like that's a classification, right? Does it have to be prime land? Are you only buying prime land?
No.
Okay.
Typically, we're seeing like 80 to 90% prime soils.
Okay.
I say prime as a bucket or as an overarching. It's prime, locally important, and unique.
Yeah.
It's all three of those. So NRCS designates local importance.
Yep.
unique, and prime. So we're running it from their data
Okay.
and saying, it's competitive for federal funds if it's 100% or 90 to 100%, but even 70 to 80% can still be somewhat competitive
Okay.
for federal matching.
And I think that those are the same categories that the American Farmland Trusts use as in their like resilient, like they've got the new map of resilient things. Okay, because I was going to say those are the lands that we should be prioritizing. Clearly, right? Like good soil.
No way to reinvent them.
Exactly.
Create.
Yes. Okay. Just to make sure that that is somewhere, because that's.
Yeah, a couple thousand years. That's the long.
Oh, I have had solar developers tell me, we are creating new soils. We're just tearing down the Amazon. Like, don't worry about covering prime farmland and solar panels because we can create new soils. We will just burn down the Amazon. So, there's that. Like.
Local crimes. Don't need to go to the Amazon for more crime service.
Did everyone have a chance to finish their initial scoring? So let's talk about how you scored and why. Let's have a conversation. And again, I guess let's start with the non-GAC members, and then we'll include the GAC members and see where we land. I can't remember your name. Ryan, thank you. Do you want to start? You want to share how you scored?
So I scored the 1,000-acre blocks a 1. The farmland complexes at a 3. And the local food and new farmers a 4. The Huron River a 1, and the view sheds a 1. For a total of 10. So.
Anybody have questions for Ryan?
Why did you do farmland complexes and local food?
Well, because I am a new farmer and local food movement is something I exist in, and the farmland complexes because I found it more. I found it better to focus on maybe there is a bunch of development in the area, and it would be nice to get that parcel right next to it, and instead of the 1,000-acre block, which I do think I do still prioritize at least 1 point towards that. I think the Huron River is always, we keep on talking about the pollution within it, so that has to get a point. And the recreation accessibility, the only reason I put that as a 0 was the question of maintaining, and that kind of got brought up. And the view sheds as a 1 because I think that's worth a point because that's something of importance to be able to have scenic. I think that's one thing about Ann Arbor well, not the one, but something that you could look back in Ann Arbor and say there's a ton of trees. You can't say that a lot of places, and just so I think that's something that is part of Ann Arbor. So,
How about you, Rich?
Well, I think I'm probably one of the lowest informed people here. So I just kind of went a little bit off a gut. I ended up giving 3 to the 1,000-acre blocks, 3 to what I call the parcel priorities, 3 to local food and new farmers, and then 1 for the water protection, and then 0 for the rest. Because I'm not sure I have enough data to really differentiate, but rank 1 or higher between the 1,000 block, the parcel priorities, and the local food and new farmers. I just view them all as equal priority in my book. So.
I put 5 to the 1,000-acre parcel, or 1,000-acre blocks, and then I put 5 to the targeted properties, prime resilient soils. I think it's more maybe more interesting why I didn't give points to other things. So the farmland complexes, I think that you made the targeted property fills that gap. I think we have good staff. I would trust our staff to figure out what are the properties that we really want to have, and the GAC to figure that out. So I think that replaces that rather than this made a whole lot of sense early on geographically targeting, but not necessarily anymore. In terms of the local food and farmers, I think it's really hard to figure out like how to define it. Like the definition of that's so hard, and it's the land. Like both of these things, like what boils down to is the land, farmable land, and that's also why I think Huron, like the Huron River, I think that that's really important. But I think that there are other things that can do. I mean, there are programs in terms of. What is it? I mean, CRP to some extent helps to protect land along waterways, or this is where solar panels might come in. A lot of the arguments that people are making is like, if you put solar panels on it, you don't have to fertilize what's underneath it. And are there ways to do that through another program, not necessarily through this? Yeah, the recreation, I think I would pull that off entirely going forward. I think you have enough to go for the long haul.
Questions, comments, or how does this compare to your priorities, GAC members?
All right. Yeah, I thought it was hard to pick between the 1,000-acre blocks and the Farmland complex, so I sort of created my own little thing. So, but how it's written, I did 1 point for 1,000 acres, and for Farmland complex, I did 2, but I also in other put another 2, and I don't think this is qualified in the definition, but protecting farms at highest risk of development. So not just prime soils, but prime soils and the most at risk, I think really need to be a combined strategy. I gave 2 to local food and new farmers, because yes, we need to talk about it, but again, that may look like many different things to people, especially if you're a livestock operation that's selling none of your stuff local. You know, it's really just hard to do that at scale and then also be local. So I think that's another thing that's confusing, is if we're looking at the big parcels, chances are those aren't the same ones that are local producers. So I think we need to investigate that a little more. Huron River, I gave it a 2, but I would also extend that to all the other watersheds, including the River Raisin, Stony Creek, and what's the other one? The River Rouge, within the Greenbelt boundary. And then I gave 1 to view sheds, because yeah, it's really nice to drive around and see the bur oaks. It just is. All right.
Can I ask a question? How I think about the properties, prioritizing the properties that are imminently threatened by development. And just like local food, I have a hard time defining what it'll be. So there's septic suitability for a site, adjacency to hookup, and then actually, drop a pin in the center of the city and then do radius. So if you're within a half mile of the city, it's a certain amount of points within a mile, and then it just assumes that process assumes that development is less and less further and further away, which isn't necessarily true as you get closer and closer to Dexter or closer and closer to Saline. So I guess everyone input on how to actually measure threat level, other than qualitatively in the Greenbelt Commission's review, from an aerial we'd be able to see or know, hopefully from other publicly available data, that if a property was just sold to become a development. That's a very obvious one. Yeah. 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 Number of subdivisions within a half mile.
But that's where it's in conflict, right? Because if it's surrounded by subdivisions, then it's hard to get the right? Like,
it's not surrounded yet, and that's what I mean. So it's
yeah,
close by.
got it. But to the extent that it's okay, yeah.
It will leapfrog next to the next
Right.
section or whatever.
I mean, like some places they're like, well, we're just gonna count this part out. Like we're just gonna say, you know what, this cannot be saved. Like this is always going to be a gap in the belt because it's already too far gone. Does that make so? But I don't. That's hard.
I often, when I think of that one, I actually think of down in Saline. you can see it on the map. The Brown Farm in Saline that was protected in late 90s, early 2000s. And, you know, that it wasn't a 20-acre farm that then would end up being surrounded by development. It was 500 acres that just changed the face of Saline forever. Where they thought all their housing and expansion would go is just off the table entirely forever. And so the balance between the opportunity at hand, is it a 30-acre farm or is it a 300? If it's 300 and it's imminent, we could have a significant impact forever. If it's 30, long-term, 30, 40, 50, 80 years from now, what are we looking at around that? So I struggle with that.
That's why I think we need to combine the two.
Yeah.
We need to assess both the complex and then within the complex, the ones that are the
Okay.
most. So I think that would also help narrow it down a little bit more. Because we're already looking at a specific area.
Yeah.
Within that area, we can say, oh, you know, this one has the best soil for septic.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Sorry. I'm done.
So the one other thing to add on to that to make it even more complicated, right? Sometimes it's what the townships have on the books, like what their local planning calls for, that actually makes it more susceptible. And so rather than, and this is like the thing to consider, rather than potentially Webster Township being your partner or whatever, Lodi Township, whoever has their own millages being your partner, it's the places that actually allow a lot of development right now, or like have a zoning ordinance that allows lots of development, that are the places where you might then prioritize. And I don't know what the right thing to do is. You could say, well, if they're not doing it, like we've got the money so we can do it. Or I don't know, like, or do you want those dollars to go farther? Like that's where like having a conversation, right? It can't be just a loan, like.
What did other folks feel were their priorities? And you can tell your points or you can talk about it more generally.
Okay, I had 2 for the first 1,000-acre blocks, 3 for the farmland complexes, 2 for local food and new farmers, 2 for the Huron River watershed. I skipped view sheds and 1 point for recreation. Generally speaking, I agree that we have enough. If you've ever been to the Scioto Woods, I urge you to check that out. It's unlike any park in Ann Arbor for sure. That's that.
I have a question based on the conversation that you guys were having before. Would it make sense to combine parcel level priorities might include prime and resilient soils as well as land that might be at high risk? Does parcel level, okay. So there's sort of like scoring of parcel priorities and then.
It could be like a subcategory.
Mm-hmm.
In farmland complex.
Right.
That could be one of the criteria.
Okay. Thank you.
I said 2 for 1,000-acre blocks, 4 for farmland complexes, 1 for local food and new farmers, and 3 for the Huron River. I sort of think protecting the Huron River is important, particularly I think a lot of people in Ann Arbor view this as their water source, and given the issues with the Flint water crisis and all of that, I think we're all much more aware of the quality of our water. And I don't know if you separate that out, because I think preserving the farmlands in the watershed are a big factor in helping the Huron River water quality. But I do think that that's important.
Well, the one time I did submit my votes, I remember trying to pack them all into 1,000-acre blocks and farmland complexes. But this time I thought, well, I'm just going to spread them out as far as I could. So I gave 2 points each to priority parcels, local food, Huron River view sheds, and then I put in an other around biodiversity and wildlife corridors. But the 1,000-acre blocks is really interesting. And actually, when you were talking at the very beginning of the meeting about the green belt itself, and it clearly resonated for you, as it does for me as a concept. I've been struck over the past several weeks at least, or maybe months, but sporadic appearances of the Greenbelt in MLive and other chat forums where it's getting really disparaged as a term, as a concept. And the fact that it's not a green belt right now. And so there's a little slippage in the language, and so I'm not, that's not, I'm in a total non sequitur here. I don't know why the heck I didn't put down votes for 1,000-acre blocks, but it's sort of, for me, conceptually, the idea of prioritizing properties on whatever set of criteria we choose as a community to pick, whether it's prime soils or Huron River watershed or biodiversity, or whatever categories we come up with, as maybe as where I'd, at least for this meeting, would put my emphasis. I do think there's intrinsic value in larger blocks of land for reasons that were enumerated, but I wonder also whether that's really achievable going forward the next 15 years, given that we've done. It sounds like, I just didn't know the percentage, that it was as high as 20% of available farmland protected in the Greenbelt. So it'll just be a really interesting question that I'm sure will get answered in the coming weeks and months.
This is a provocative question, right? But preserving farmland is not always good for water quality. In Ann Arbor, like, it depends entirely on farming practices, right? When we give sorry, is that
science? That's science. That's that damn Lake Erie and all that phosphorus going in there, right,
well,
Remy?
So what I'm wondering about, so teach me. What I'm wondering about is, it's one thing if we're saying we're preserving the, if we're putting additional restrictions then on the farming practices, because there's some, if you have a stake in that, then you can do that. But if you're not requiring best practices, we know that a lot of farmers, especially in this area, do, but there's nothing to stop people from not. And so I totally agree with you that there's so much value, like, people resonate, like the Huron River resonates with so many people. And if we can get the Huron River Watershed Council, when the millage comes back up for renewal, if they can say the Greenbelt is one of the reasons that we have been so successful, like, I think that goes a huge way. But I also want to, like, is that, yeah.
Say something? Every farm that's preserved has a conservation plan. And on our farm, we have grass waterways along all the watersheds. So I can't help but believe that is a vast improvement in improving water quality. So if every one of those farms has a conservation plan and they're living up to their conservation plan and maintaining those grass waterways, I think that goes a long way.
Knowing that, so, like, I think of myself as pretty educated on this, but I didn't know that. So I think that's important, but also, like, who's watching that, I guess, is the question.
So the caveat is only the farms that are protected with federal funding are required to have a conservation plan that's approved and developed by NRCS. So those ones, which are the bulk of what we've done, is projects with NRCS funding, they're required to have a conservation plan, and then the district conservationist has to come out, I believe, every 5 years and recertify the plan. So the farmer's responsible for upkeeping the records with FSA and then working with NRCS to keep their conservation plan in place. And then the easement requires that they do that. So whereas if the property was unprotected, they could do a conservation plan for 5 years with NRCS to be eligible for certain funds like CRP or other USDA programs. But with the easement, it says in perpetuity, something akin to a conservation plan needs to be in place. For the other properties, the calculations that I had in this presentation I didn't pull them out of thin air. So in terms of water quality, I do understand that people feel that, yes, farmland versus woodlands or wetlands are far inferior in terms of water filtration and water quality benefits in a landscape. But this analysis was done using eagles and DEQs, eagles, the acronym's changing. Yeah. They have a calculator that says plug in the acres of land and tell us what it is, farmland or natural area, and then plug in a hypothetical scenario of what that land could become, and we'll tell you the relative benefits of what keeping it in its current condition as opposed to this developed scenario is. So what we did was we pulled all of the farmland acres that we've protected out and all of the natural areas acres out, plugged it into the calculator, and then the alternative scenario was all of that being converted to single-family housing. So even with that, single-family housing would have had this detriment on an annual basis compared to keeping it farming. So it is worse than a natural, really strong, intact ecosystem that's mature and diverse. But farming is better than the alternative, than pavement
Yeah. Well,
for water quality.
Or also lawns that you're also spraying phosphorus and
Yeah,
nitrogen on
exactly.
higher rates than you might even be in your conventional operation.
So,
Yeah.
so I think there needs to be both a conversation that lets people know what above and beyond practices are being taken on the conserved properties to ensure water quality, but also people to realize that the baseline for this, the baseline of which we need to measure ourselves against, is complete and utter destruction of a property and paving it, and what those implications are for the watershed, because those aren't talked about as much as the existing farms are ruining the water quality of our watershed and of our lakes. And it's not the commercial 10,000 acre commodity producer that's got the economy of scale to over apply fertilizer and phosphorus that is working with the Greenbelt. It's the responsible farmers that are working with the Greenbelt, but all of these people end up getting blamed for what the economy of scale farmer can end up doing to the watershed. So I think our narrative needs to be that just because they're not producing necessarily local food or they all have filter strips on their property, they're not the culprit at hand. Yeah. But finding those hotspots is really difficult scientifically. So, yeah. Anyway.
I was noticing that local food and new farmers are combined on the old strategies. Are those, do those carry the same weight for you?
Well, one's a lot easier to define than the other. Because according to the USDA, beginning farmers, you have to be within 10 years of starting farm in order to qualify for certain loans and through FSA.
Okay. So there's an existing definition.
There is a specific cutoff of 10 years.
and prioritizing, and if we're talking about prioritizing something for new farmers, it's the person who would be entering the agreement is the definition of a new farmer, which in my mind, like giving them money, right? Giving them an easement to then reinvest that money in something else, that's an awesome opportunity, right? Like it's hard for them. The challenge is like, how did they get that land in the first place, right? Like, right. So that's tricky. But I also think like the defining that is way easier, and I would feel more comfortable with that than the local food, just because I know it means so many different things, and also it can change. Like what you're growing now, like, and we want it to change. We need to allow the people who have these properties to like respond to market conditions, right? And so I hate to tie their hands into something, but also like I don't know how many people are like trying to game the system, but who knows?
So if I had to make a choice, I would prioritize new farmers, but the definition, like you said, for me, it's a new farmer owner, Because you said, right, you're a farmer, but you don't own your land. It's, well, you have to pay. Do you pay rent or?
No, but that's I have a special relationship
Oh.
with the landowner.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I was looking at it, I thought it was like, an apartment versus owning a house kind of
I mean,
thing.
it can be.
Okay.
Part of the reason that sorry. Part of the reason that Tillian came to exist, and I was also the former program manager over there, was to bridge this gap, to be a place where people without the capital to buy land or without family access to land to come and start their businesses. And the idea was then they would transition, but then, that was before sort of the prices rebounded. So I feel like Sealy Farm and Green Things got really lucky that they purchased when they did back in 2012-ish, because they were able to really take advantage of the change in value with the PDR. But as it stands right now, I don't know. It's an open question.
So if you were writing the priorities today, are there any that are missing from this list? These were the original ones from the list plus parcel level priorities, which could be determined based on prime soil or biodiversity or other criteria. Did that capture the other items that you all listed? Okay. So let's play a game for a second. If you would take one of these and then pass around. So you've got sort of a green light, red light. We didn't do this at the other meetings because we didn't have time with a larger group. But I'm curious because it is tempting to spread priorities across a large list. So if you only had 3 green go votes, which would you put them next to? And you can only put 1 per priority. So you can put them on 3 different priorities. And then the red are optional. If there's 1 or 2 or 3 that you would like to sort of vote down and say, I really think these are problematic and need to be looked at, you could use the red. You don't have to. So 3 green votes.
2 out of 3.
Speaking of voting things down, on this one up here so that we can then see what everybody did. If you only had 3 votes, so I'm trying to force your hand a little bit just to see what your true priorities are. But then you also have this ability to sort of vote down, which you don't have to use, but you can. Do you need a new set? Okay. Right.
I know, right? I'll just wait till the end. Put a red where everyone else is green.
No one's using their reds. So
Or if you're colorblind, they all look
they all look the same. I should choose other colors.
The Greenbelt has an annual bus tour
Yeah.
where we stop at 3 stops.
Okay.
Solar Farm's the first stop this
Okay.
year.
Right on.
Yeah,
Cool.
October 12th, which is a Saturday morning.
Really want to get a feel for Greenbelt.
Yeah. I talked to Kim, but
Okay.
she's
Tour
super
our 2 properties going in.
Okay.
really busy.
I think I
Okay.
got something for
I'll
October
be there
12th.
tomorrow.
Okay.
Call Remy,
Cool.
find out about
I'm
it.
I'm gonna reach out to her.
It'll take you 2 or 3 hours.
I just finalized the itinerary, looking for the final stop.
3 or 4 different places.
Did everyone have a chance to use their dots that they wanted to use? Okay. So one of the challenges of having this series of conversations has been, as additional ideas come up and get added to the bottom, are they being weighted the same way, these other items, as the ones that were originally on the list? And the various ways that we calculate these scores over time are also going to come up with slightly different results. So I wanted to see, for this group, kind of get a heat map of where this group is. And so the priorities here are parcel level, moving towards a parcel level priority model, farmland complexes, and water, right? With a specific downgrading to some extent of the view sheds and recreational access. If you were to put these in order, this would come to the bottom of the list. This would come to the top. Yeah. 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 We may have to do this with the GAC at some point, right? Dun, dun, dun. Give you a practice run. That's right. Yeah. Well, that's the hard, like I said, it's the hardest part about strategic planning is we come up with lots of ideas and then we want them all. But in reality, you have to choose where your money goes. And so the question, the Huron River watershed being a priority, that's an interesting observation. Perhaps feeling that recreation and access are not necessarily not important, but perhaps already covered or not as important to the Greenbelt, or maybe the cost doesn't outweigh the benefit. Anybody have other comments or reflections before we sort of move on towards wrapping up this evening? Yeah.
It hasn't really been talked about directly, but I know something that's come up in other conversations is what about practices within the farm and whether or not that should be something we talk about. And I know us farmers around the table, we don't think that that's the right approach because, again, you need to be flexible. You need to be able to do that, and that's not necessarily our role, although I know there are many people out there who would say, oh, but isn't there so much support? We're moving towards requiring organic certification or this, that, and the other thing. So I think that that's maybe something to ask other folks if they've heard similar stuff. And a sidebar is I know a lot of people are like, oh, yeah, let's require local food. But I also want to ask these people are they the ones actually buying from local farmers? Like I personally, I'm just really doubtful that those same people that are clamoring for that are actually putting their dollars all towards that. But again, maybe that's another type of data that we can acquire somewhere. But those are some thoughts that I had.
I am definitely of the mind that you need to allow farmers to be flexible and respond. And this is exactly where I've had a lot of conversations over coffee about what do we do about this solar stuff? Because that, how does that fit in? And not necessarily Greenbelt properties, but it could be Greenbelt properties. But that could be a really viable opportunity. And so definitely I would not add that to the strategic plan of requiring additional things of farmers. The second part, you said something else though about another caveat on there. It wasn't not just farming practices.
Oh, also whether or not people are actually supporting
oh yeah,
local farmers.
Right.
Yeah. They're demanding be spent in one way.
People are not always internally consistent.
Sure.
Come on.
Well, exactly. And I just wonder if there's some way we can measure that or get a pulse check, because people might be just saying that as a way to maybe critique what they think the shortcomings are without actually supporting that system themselves. That's just my own personal. Oh, sorry. But that's something else that's just my own personal curiosity as a farmer and sociologist who loves data. So, anyway.
Any other questions that are coming to your mind to be grappled with? One of the things we're going to be doing, so next week we have one more of these sessions, then we're going to be going back to the GAC with what have we heard and where do we think are the question, where are the points of sort of tension where the tough decisions need to be made? And I think you've identified a few today. What'd you say?
I look forward to that.
You look forward to it? Okay, good. So for those who are non-GAC or if I could, this is your first meeting? Yeah. So then you can leave your scoring and please change it however you want before you leave it. On the back of the sheet, there's also a feedback form, which is another way for you to express your priorities. Okay, in Ann Arbor is City of Ann Arbor. Thank you for asking. And then when you're done, we do have more time if people want to chat or have food or look at any of the posters that have fallen off the wall. Please feel free to stick around.
I'm going to have to bolt. I want to thank you for facilitating such a great conversation, and thank you all so much for coming. I just thought it was such a great conversation. I'm stepping down from the Greenbelt in November, and so there's going to be an open at-large position. If anyone is interested, even remotely, and or if you have networks that you want to forward, I think there's an announcement maybe at the website, and we could certainly get you one if there are networks you want to circulate this opening position to. But thank you again. Good luck with the farming. Good luck with the harvest.